The complicated circumstances surrounding Sergeant Bergdahl's capture and the administration's decision to free him in exchange for 5 high-level Taliban militants without prior notice to Congress have all combined to create a huge political storm. Congressman Mike Rogers of the Intelligence Committee had this to say on our show just moments ago.
The Taliban has used this certainly as a propaganda win. We know that these individuals can talk to the Taliban when they're in Qatar. We know that Qatar has had a bad track record when it comes to keeping detainees from Gitmo in Qatar. So we've got a lot of problems now we're going to have to work through in order to make sure that we don't have a price on our head of not only our soldiers in the field in Afghanistan, but our diplomats as well around the world in dangerous places.
Joining me now are 2 people with unique perspective on all of this. From Los Angeles, Gail Limon, journalist, author, and senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, who was living and working in Afghanistan when Sergeant Bergdahl was taken prisoner. And from Baltimore, retired U.S. Army captain and an Afghanistan combat veteran, Wes Moore. Welcome both. First to you, Wes. Let's talk about the military and the response. I was talking to Jim Miklaszewski earlier, who said it was no mystery. For 5 years, there's been a lot of talk from his platoon members and others about the circumstances, the controversial circumstances of his departure from post.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, this wasn't much of a mystery, and people knew. There was always word about kind of some backstory behind this that was, somewhere beneath the surface. And the truth is that, the military community is excited about the idea of his return because, we believe in the idea that if a soldier is inside of enemy hands, that we know that our military and our political structure will do everything that it takes to bring us back home. But that still doesn't excuse or in any way dismiss the idea that the circumstances behind his capture do need to be evaluated and do need to be investigated.
And Gail, having lived and worked in Afghanistan, as we see this drawdown, do you think it's true that this was the only way to get him out with a high-stakes trade like this? There was no extraction possibility?
I mean, I think that there are a lot of conversations going on asking exactly that. But I think what is so striking about the whole conversation is that less than 1% of this country has fought 13 years of its war. And somehow we all seem to be slightly taken off guard when people who just celebrated Memorial Day without their loved ones at home had a really emotional reaction to the fact that it is wonderful that he is home, but we don't know all the answers to what has happened. And I do think that brings a lot of questions about exactly how close America is to this war that we've been fighting and how distant so many of us feel from the fact that this war actually is still going on. It almost as if it takes the Bergdahl case for us to remember that America is at war.
And in fact, some of the positives coming out of this, it's been suggested, is that perhaps this interaction with the Taliban, the communications, the advanced planning we saw from the video earlier, how precisely it was orchestrated, could lead to reconciliation talks with the next Afghan president. Wes, how likely is that? We know that Hamid Karzai shot everything down, but that there could be a different outcome after these elections are over.
Well, I think both sides are going to realize there is a bit of realpolitik that is going to come as the new administration comes in, as the new Afghan administration comes in, and starts to realize that the post-Afghan war Afghanistan is not just going to be something that the Afghans are going to have to think heavily about, but also its regional partners and also the United States. But at the same time, I think even when you watch how this transfer happened, I think there is a glimmer of light and hope that comes along with it. But I think one thing this has also done is shown just how complicated this transition could and probably will be as well.
Gail, what about Qatar and its role in all of this? The defense from the White House is we were not negotiating with terrorists. We were working with Qatar, the intermediary, and they have assured us that they will not let them get back to the battlefield at least for a year. How much control will Qatar even assert over them?
Well, and it's such a good question, right? I mean, the Taliban opened the office and then closed it, but apparently the office is still operating in some way for the Taliban. That enough of an office was open that they could have these conversations. I think the idea always was that this could be an opening to more conversations, but now, given the fact that we are on the way out, some analysts have called this much more cleanup than actual, opening to discussions, and I think we're going to have to see whether this leads to anything. You know, I think the DNI said basically about 30% of folks who've been released have returned to the battlefield, and the president said yesterday that if that happens, we will be in a position to go after these folks again. But I think, again, what is the cost of going after them? Those are real people with real lives and real families who will have to go out every night on those missions to find these folks again. And I think that's why we're having such a heated conversation about what this all means.
The bottom line, Wes Moore, as a former fighter in Afghanistan and someone in command, how do the troops, do you think, finally absorb this? I know it's hard to generalize, but we've seen the bitterness of those who lost loved ones. They claim 6 died because they were on patrols looking for him. What about in general? Do you think that the military communities say, well, at least they went and got him back?
Well, I think in general, the military community, applauds the fact that when someone is behind enemy lines, when someone is captured by enemy, they are not forgotten. And I think what happened when the Special Forces soldiers actually got their hands on Sergeant Bergdahl and they said to him, as reported, they said to him, they said, we didn't forget you. That means something to us. When a person is on a ship and they fall off a ship, the first question isn't necessarily how did they fall off, did they jump or they pushed or whatever. The first thing they're going to do is we're going to turn the ship around and we're going to go pick that person up. There are questions that need to be answered, and those questions have to be answered, and I think to make us satisfied. But at the same time, the fact that our people are never forgotten when they're in enemy hands does mean something to us.
Wes Moore, Gail Lamont, it's great to see both of you. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming in today.